Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, we're going to take a look at who should be the Phillies starting center fielder based on the current roster in 2025.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me for some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been a radio on-air personality at 97.5 The Fanatic here in Philadelphia for 5 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for the past 3 seasons, and this is my 3rd year, or I guess I'm into my 4th year now that we're in 2025, as the host of Locked On Phillies. I had to update the intro a little bit. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're listening to this in podcast form. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. I appreciate it very much. And that'll also get you notifications when new episodes are posted. So it doesn't just help me, it helps you keep up to date on all the Phillies offseason info. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Win or lose, visit FanDuel.com to get started. By the way, wearing my Eagles sweatshirt, Philadelphia Eagles in the postseason in the NFL, so bet on them and check out Locked On Eagles, our great Locked On Network show covering the Philadelphia Eagles. But this is a baseball podcast, and we got some stuff to get into today because there are some unresolved questions about the Philadelphia Phillies, and that makes sense. It's January 6th. We've got a long way till we even hit spring training. We just barely passed the halfway point of the offseason, and there could be still some changes to the roster coming. But as things currently stand, I ran through in a previous episode, a recent episode, about who should be the people in the starting lineup for the Philadelphia Phillies, or rather what order should that look like, and the rotation and the bullpen and all of that stuff, and who ends up where. But I had Brandon Marsh set in, like, no doubt, to be the starting center fielder over Johan Rojas, who just seems to give you much more offensively than Rojas does at this point in his career. But I saw something today that was interesting, and it made me rethink who should be the starting center fielder for the Philadelphia Phillies in 2025. Now, a lot could change, right? Remember when we're having this conversation. So if they go out and sign somebody who's a bona fide starting outfielder at the major league level and can play center, and then I don't want people to be like, well, you said Marsh or you said Rojas were going to be the starting center fielder. Obviously, this is as the roster stands now. But Johan Rojas has a very interesting case, right? We know he's a plus all-world defender, like unbelievably athletic. And we know he's also young. Like, these are the things that we know about Johan Rojas. But we know he can't hit his way out of a paper bag right now at the major league level over the course of 162 games. He's shown flashes, not enough flashes. And the Phillies, they have an offseason program for him, just like they did last year, to try and work on stuff, the offensive parts of his game. And maybe the base running as well. Had some boneheaded base running decisions earlier in last year, got sent down for a little bit, then gets called back up. And he was much better on the base paths after that. Now, on the other hand, you have Brandon Marsh. And Marsh is a guy that is the more proven major league athlete. He has the higher upside offensively, but he's not as good defensively, even though he was a Gold Glove nominee in left field this past year for the Philadelphia Phillies. Rojas is the better defender. Anyone who's going to argue based on Gold Glove nominations and not watching these two play that Marsh is the better defender than Johan Rojas, you're crazy. It's Rojas. But Marsh had strikeout issues big time in 2024, and that really is a major issue, especially with the rest of this lineup being boom or bust and hunting those home runs. So Marsh has upsides and downsides. Rojas has upsides and downsides. It's this very tricky balance of, like, one, what does the team need? And two, who fits that spot the best is the best overall player. Now, in an ideal world, you just say, this guy better than that guy. He is the starting player at this position. But it's not that complicated. It's not that simple, rather. I almost went backwards on that one. No, there's more that goes into it. Who fits the nature of what this team is trying to do? Who fills in spots that the Phillies don't currently perform well at? Defense is one of those. So that is a check in the box of Johan Rojas, especially if Max Kepler is your left fielder and Nick Castellanos is your right fielder. Neither of those guys are like plus defenders. Kepler is average to maybe slightly above average as a defensive outfielder. Castellanos is below average to average as a defensive outfielder. So having an all-world center fielder defensively would be a major asset for the Phillies. And Brandon Marsh could be a really good center fielder, but he's not going to be Johan Rojas. He just doesn't have that level of fielding in him, or at least he hasn't displayed that to this point in his career. So that's a check in the box of Rojas, but Brandon Marsh beats the heck out of him offensively. But there's an interesting storyline that you should keep your eye on this offseason. So Johan Rojas was down in the Dominican Winter League, right? He had a chance to play down there for the first time. He got the opportunity to do that. A good league. Some Major League Baseball players go down there. There's also some general like indie ball guys and stuff like that that make their way. But there's competition. This ain't your summer league, men's league, beer league type stuff. No, like there are Major League players, good ball players in this league. It's not like the cream of the crop of Major League Baseball talent, but there's some solid guys down there. So this is not just something where you write off and say, well, it's not the majors. It's not the Arizona Fall League or anything like that where you have the top prospects. It's not spring training or it's not minor league ball. Well, I would say that it would be like the equivalent of maybe like a AA or a AAA summer league, maybe. But obviously in the winter, because the weather down there is, it gives you the ability to play baseball in the months that you can't play up here in the United States. I mean, we got a snowstorm here in Philadelphia. But anyway, to get to what Johan Rojas did, he was named the Rookie of the Year in this league. And the reason he was named the Rookie of the Year is the stat line that he was able to put up. So he hit 295 in the season with a 382 on-base percentage, and he was 23 for 23 in stolen bases over the 27 games he played. So 27 games is not like the world's biggest sample size, but stealing 23 bags in 27 games, that dude was running. And if he's unlocked something with his ability on the base pass where he's figured out how to be a more polished base runner while still using that trademark Johan Rojas speed, well, that's going to be something that would be majorly beneficial either in a pinch running role for the Phillies or if Rojas does indeed get the starting position in center field. And hitting 295, that ain't shabby. 382 on base percentage, you'll take that. If Johan Rojas, like, it's a step to say he's going to do that at the major league level, and no one can rightfully predict that. But that's something where you should perk up a little bit and be like, oh, okay, Johan, do we have something brewing here where maybe Rojas is becoming this more complete baseball player? There's something that you need to remember, right? I've preached this a couple times on the podcast, and it's one of those tenets of young players that I always go back to, and young players in situations with teams like the Philadelphia Phillies. So the Phillies are championship contenders. They are fighting for World Series and division titles and deep postseason runs and all of these things that create this crucible of pressure for anybody on the roster. And the fan base knows that for sure. There's no one in Philadelphia that goes, well, it's okay. We can give these guys time to figure stuff out at the start of the season. And I'm not just talking about young players. I'm talking about the team. There's no margin of error for the Philadelphia Phillies with what they want to accomplish and what the fan base expects that they should accomplish. So what that means sometimes is that we forget, or rather we choose as well, to evaluate young players on an unfair scale. Now, they don't have the luxury to play in Oakland or play in Chicago or like play with a team that Miami, where it's just like, we don't have expectations. Go out there. You're going to play a bunch of baseball. You're going to try and develop. We're going to work on things. The fan base isn't going to kill you because they don't expect anything from you or anything from the team. That's not a luxury that you get here at Philadelphia. So when you see guys like Brandon Marsh and Johan Rojas, who are still young baseball players, they're young compared to when guys hit their prime at the major league level. Brandon Marsh a little further along than Johan Rojas, but these guys aren't like polished veteran guys. We forget sometimes when we see them in big moments or when we're constantly thinking of them in the frame of like, oh, can they be the starting center fielder on a World Series winning baseball team? Like, look at the other teams like Teoscar Hernandez, Aaron Judge. Like, these are the guys that you're looking at as dudes on some other teams that are like these big-time outfielders on World Series contenders. Rojas, Marsh, they don't fit into that type of category. And you unfairly evaluate a young player without giving them room to say, well, what could they become? What player could they be in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years? And the Phillies aren't looking 5 years down the line. But if you had said this 2 years ago about Johan Rojas looking at 2025, that would have been a 3-year time frame. So that's the thing. Could he develop into a guy that could hit at the major league level? I don't think the book is closed on Johan Rojas. Frankly, I don't think the book is closed on Brandon Marsh. But now I'm starting to figure out a little bit of like, well, there's uncertainty, at least for me, when it comes to who should be that guy in center field. Like the numbers would say it should be Marsh, right? But it's not that easy of a decision. And it becomes much more difficult if Johan Rojas steps into an improved offensive mindset in 2025. And we're not going to find that out till spring training. I'm still going to go with Brandon Marsh today because he is the more polished Major League Baseball player, in my opinion. He's also the more experienced Major League Baseball player, in my opinion. And he's not giving up a crazy amount defensively to Johan Rojas, but he's giving up enough to make it a conversation. And there's right now, I would say that I'm probably 60-40 in favor of it being Marsh. It's not that big of a gap. It's really not. It's not a lock. It's not a blind, easy decision to say that it's going to be Brandon Marsh over Johan Rojas. And that margin gets thinner every time you see Rojas do something well offensively. He's going to get the opportunity to play in the playoffs in the Dominican Winter League. So we'll see what he's able to get done down there. And if he has another strong showing and then goes to Clearwater and we start to get these reports of, the Phillies really like this guy's progression, it could very well be Johan Rojas, number 18 out there patrolling center field when it comes to the 2025 Philadelphia Phillies. And that would be an asset if you could get him to hit because you need defensive help in the outfield with the guys currently in the corners. Now, this whole conversation becomes a moot point if the Phillies go out and they sign somebody that could play premier positions in the outfield. And then they shift around their whole outfield and who knows where anybody goes. But where things stand today, I'd still go Brandon Marsh, but the margin is thin between him and Johan Rojas. Now, speaking of these fringe moves, because Rojas or Marsh, one of those guys are going to be starters in center field most likely for the Phillies, but they're not like the top of the heap when it comes to the major league roster. And now you start to, this is the point of the offseason where you evaluate the depth parts and everything. Well, the Phillies moved on from a guy who was a depth piece for them last year. They made a pitching trade. Tyler Gilbert was traded. And I'll tell you the terms of that and why we even care about that. Well, part of it is the mindset. That is the most important part of this move for the Philadelphia Phillies. We will discuss that coming up and what the return for him. It's an intriguing young prospect that you're going to get back for Tyler Phillips. So we'll talk about that coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about FanDuel first, though, because you got big upsets. You got game-winning drives. That's the NFL playoffs. You might say, that's pretty darn good. Well, they're better with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. So I'm looking at the Eagles, right? The Philadelphia Eagles are hosting the Green Bay Packers. They are 5.5-point favorites. And I think they're a touchdown better than that team. Maybe take a look at that. Take a look at the birds and see if you're willing to bet the hometown favorite or find your favorite bet, a parlay, a prop, same game parlay, all these great things that they put together on FanDuel. You've got it futures if you want Birds, Super Bowl champ. Hey, you never know. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of our friends over at the NFL. All right, now this is kind of, if you saw this trade, right, and it came across your social media feed or you heard it on the radio or something, and you're just like, oh, well, I don't really recognize that name. I don't really recognize this name. It's the nothing burger. It's just one of those moves that will never affect anything for the Philadelphia Phillies. One, you very well could be right. But two, it is January 6th, and there is snow on the ground, and there is not that much to talk about when it comes to the Philadelphia Phillies. So you have to analyze everything. And I do think there's something interesting in this move. So the Philadelphia Phillies traded Tyler Gilbert to the Chicago White Sox for Aaron Gomes. Now, Aaron Gomes is a minor league guy. He's never pitched higher than single A. But Tyler Gilbert is interesting. So Tyler Gilbert was DFA'd by the Phillies, sent back down to the minors in December. He was called up at points in the Major League regular season this past year. Relief guy, threw pretty well at AAA, had solid numbers. you're looking at a situation where he was a depth piece in the bullpen. And right now, like when we did our evaluation of the bullpen roles for the Philadelphia Phillies, I have Michael Mercado as part of the Major League bullpen because, frankly, they don't have enough Major League caliber arms, in my opinion, right now to fill out that bullpen. And they're still waiting to figure out if they're trading Alec Bohm. This is the old sticking point of, if Bohm moves, then you got to sign Bregman or some other player to play third base, and then you don't know what money you have to round out your bullpen, so you don't know how much money you could spend. It's just it's a whole thing that they have to figure out, and we've had that conversation numerous times. But with that in mind, Tyler Gilbert's a guy that has pitched at the Major League level. Not extensively, but he was a guy with a Major League resume. And lesser teams would love to have Tyler Gilbert. Clearly, Chicago White Sox added him to the 40-man roster after they acquired him. So they're going to be in a situation where they're going to look to get Major League innings or potential Major League innings in a depth role out of Tyler Gilbert this year. So why did the Phillies say, well, we're willing to trade him for a 23-year-old in single A? To me, the mindset of this trade shows you they're confident that they can acquire other pieces in the bullpen that are better than that, or they are confident with the guys that they already have in-house. But the fact that you're a championship contender and you're trading away pitching depth, and Tyler Gilbert is not like, oh, well, you needed him. But you never know what happens with arms. And if 2 or 3 guys go down at the same time, well, you get pretty thin. And anybody with Major League experience is a benefit to an organization. The Phillies feel pretty good about their spot, and now they're starting to look at, okay, how do we build for the future as well while sustaining this level of Major League success? And that's what this move says. So that's a sign of confidence. That's negotiating from a position of strength by the Philadelphia Phillies. And make no mistake, like I'm not saying, oh, they got the better part of this deal. I'm saying that they have the luxury to move players that lesser teams may want on their Major League roster because the Phillies feel like they've done a pretty darn good job of filling out their roster and their 40-man. I'm talking about the Major League and then the 40-man roster, the guys that are eligible to come up without having to make changes on the 40-man roster. And Tyler Gilbert, you'd look at that guy as someone that could be a depth piece for this team. The Phillies said no thanks because they're confident with where they're at. That's a good sign. That shows you that the front office is feeling good. Now let's talk a little bit about the actualities of this trade because Gomes, who the Phillies got back from the Chicago White Sox, he's an interesting prospect. He's only 23, so it's not like unless you've got a situation where it's what happened with Ryan Kirkring, where he goes from A-ball to pitching in the NLCS in the same year, which that doesn't happen. It's not going to happen with Gomes. It's not realistic. Ryan Kirkring is the anomaly of anomalies when it comes to pitching progression from the minor leagues, especially as a bullpen arm. I know you might say like Paul Skeens made a quick trip to the major leagues or whatever, starter, big-time pick. Like, you don't get that from a guy who Gomes was an 8th round selection, I believe. But what he did at the end of last season in single A ball, barely pitched, right? He threw 7 2/3 innings, but struck out 13 batters, allowed 10 base runners, no earned runs. Small sample size. What else is really interesting from him is he was a big part of the Tennessee Volunteers winning the College World Series this past year. So when you look at that, you say, okay, maybe it's something, maybe it's nothing. Baseball's so weird, right? Because it's not like football. You get this guy who leads his team to a national championship. By the way, college football playoffs going to be awesome this week too. So check out all our Locked On college shows. But it's not like, oh, you're the quarterback of the national championship winning football team. You won the Heisman or something. You're going to be the #1 overall pick, and you're going to be expected to be the guy for some team at the NFL level next year. That's not how baseball works. There could be a great college athlete, and then the next thing you know, they're riding a bus in Topeka, Kansas, playing single A ball for whoever. And you're low man on the totem pole for a team that is low team on the totem pole in an organization. So it doesn't happen that way in baseball, and so we forget about these guys. But I believe in one thing firmly. Well, I believe in a lot of things firmly, but something I believe firmly in this instance is that there is this strand of DNA. Scientists can't find it. It doesn't exist on any CT scan or anything like that. There is no doctor that can figure this out, but it exists. I'll tell you this, and it exists outside of sports too. Championship DNA. There's just something that some people have that others don't that makes them great, that they'll push a little bit further. They feel a little less pressure. When the moment gets big, they perform. Bryce Harper absolutely has it. He might have like a billion points of championship DNA because this guy just, every time he's in a big moment, he seems to rise to the occasion. And it's not a faster swing speed, or it's not better hand-eye or anything. It's not anything necessarily tangible. You see people who win things and you say, okay, maybe we should evaluate that higher than the same exact player on like a 10-win college baseball team. Same numbers, same velocity, same pitches, same movement. This guy won, this guy didn't. Now, some of that's team, but Gomes was a big part of Tennessee and what they were able to do in winning the College World Series. So I look at that and I say, anytime you can bring in somebody who's won something major at the collegiate level, take your chance. That guy was at least part of a championship locker room. Maybe he picked something up. Maybe he's a great teammate. Maybe he was a big reason. Maybe he has this X factor that the numbers don't show. And baseball scouts evaluate this stuff too. I'm not the first person to ever have this thought process, but my point of this is, I'm not saying follow Combs' career. He's the next Andrew Painter when it comes to Phillies pitching prospects. I'm saying that when you can bring in a guy that was a big part of a championship winning effort at the collegiate level, only 23, still an A-ball, intriguing, right? Intriguing guy that has had very little success in professional baseball because it had very little opportunity. But just that's what's fun about being able to trade for these prospects. It's like buying stock. And this could be Aerotine International from Wolf of Wall Street, where it's some dude in the shed that never makes anything and you waste all your money. Or it could be, I don't know, it could be Apple before they made the iPhone. And it just explodes. I'm sure they were big before that with personal computers. I'm not a stocks guy. I'm not a technology guy, but whatever. You understand. And they're penny stocks. They're not really giving up too much in Tyler Gilbert, but it shows the Phillies are negotiating from a position of strength when it comes to their pitching staff because they feel like they have a damn good one and a deep one at the major league level. And they brought in a guy who's somewhat intriguing somewhere down the line. Who knows if he'll ever make it to the major league level. But I like the trade for the Philadelphia Phillies in as much of a way as you can like a trade that is going to have no impact on the major league level in 2025. Coming up next, as we wrap up today's episode, heading into the new year, this is the time of the offseason where it obviously slows down a little bit. So we're bringing back some segments. If you're a longtime listener or follower of Locked On Phillies, you're going to remember some of these from before. And I got away from them a little bit because, frankly, the Phillies have been making a lot of news over the past couple of years, and we haven't had time to have like these steady segments. But for the rest of the offseason, we're bringing a couple things back, and I need audience participation. I think you're really going to enjoy them. If you haven't heard of the previous segments that we did, well, I'll tell you what they are coming up next and how you can help us out, and also what they're going to point to towards us evaluating the Philadelphia Phillies further. So we'll talk about that coming up as we wrap up today's episode. Let's talk about Game Time, though, because I love going to live events. I do. It's the best. Watching stuff on TV is fun, but going to a sports game or your favorite concert or maybe the favorite performance of a play or a comedy show. I mean, some of your favorite memories in life come from these live events. I know some of mine are. I think about the great playoff runs of Philadelphia sports, and Game Time the way that I got in the building for those. I mean, it's unbelievable, the energy, excitement, you can only get it in the building. Now, Game Time has made it even easier for you to have that opportunity for yourself with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. So recently, I was looking at Eagles postseason tickets. Hey, how much does this cost? Can I go? They're hosting the Packers. If they win, they're going to host another game. So I looked at it, and there are some amazing deals out there for this weekend's playoffs. And I'm sure if you're in a different city, root for a different team, or if you're an Eagles fan, you got great deals there on Game Time. I know already for the Eagles game, they got them. The Super Deal is particularly impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account. Use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's not just playoff time. It's game time. So the return of a couple segments that I need some help from the audience, that's you, on. And I would love it if you guys were able to do this. By the way, if you are watching, I always do this. I always tell people if you're listening in podcast form, check out the YouTube. I realize now, see, I'm an enlightened man in the year 2025. There may be people watching on YouTube that don't listen to this in podcast form. And they go, oh, I can't watch Locked On Phillies because I'm in my car. or I'm at work and the boss is on my back. Well, you can listen to this in podcast form. Wherever you get your podcast, Locked On Phillies is there. So go ahead and check us out if you have not in just the audio form. And make sure you're still subscribed to YouTube, of course, all that great stuff. I appreciate that. Some segments that I'm going to need your help on that you're going to want to be caught up on as well. So in the past seasons, I had a couple of recurring segments. Is it reoccurring or recurring? I feel like recurring is what people say, but reoccurring seems to make more sense logically. I don't know. You understand what I mean. They're going to happen weekly. All right. One is a poll response. Now, for you to be able to participate in the poll response, we call this segment Off the Poll, you're going to have to be following Locked On Phillies on Twitter. So you can follow Locked On Phillies at LO_Phillies on Twitter or X. And you're also going to want to follow me on Twitter at ConnorThomas975. Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. I normally retweet everything that I put out from the Locked On Phillies account. So you can find it both places, but I'm going to put out a Twitter poll weekly, and we're going to be able to do that. I'll probably, you know what? I'll do one today. So we're going to do that put the poll out on Monday, and then Wednesday or Thursday, we're on a very variable schedule here in the offseason because we cut down on our number of episodes because there's less news. We're basically hibernating a little bit. But I'll put it out early in the week on Monday, and then we'll do it on our middle episode of the week, whether that's Wednesday or Thursday. Another segment that we're going to do, and sorry, those questions will be anything from, like we talked about today, who do you think should be the starting center fielder for the Philadelphia Phillies? Would you prefer Alec Bohm to be traded? Do the Phillies need to add to the bullpen? Should Jeff Hoffman be paid starter money to come back as a bullpen arm for the Phillies? All of these great questions that I've talked about endlessly. Well, it's time for your opinion to be more heard than what it already is. I try and respond to people in the comments, and tweets, and everything like that, but give you a chance there, and we're going to read the responses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you my thoughts after we read the responses because I don't want to bias the polls. I always make sure I do that. I want your true, unbiased opinion on what you as a Philadelphia Phillies fan think should be the answer to the questions that we face. So we'll run that from now until probably about when spring training starts. And then we're also going to do Mailbag Monday. So what's going to happen on Fridays is I'm going to put out a tweet from the Locked On Phillies account as well. So it's very important that you're following us on social media. And I'll, of course, give the question here on the podcast as well for both the Twitter poll and for there's not so much a question for Mailbag Monday. Mailbag Monday is just kind of this potpourri catch-all. If I'm missing something that the fan base is asking about, that you guys wonder about every day, and you're like, man, why doesn't Connor talk about blank? Now, I'm not going to be able to get to every single one of them, and there may be some where it's just like, why doesn't Connor talk about trading Zach Wheeler? Like, I'm not going to do that, guys. Let's try and keep the questions realistic to things that could actually happen. Like, use a little bit of the common sense of like what the big storylines are. But I'm very interested always in trying to be representative of what the fan base wants to hear about on this show, which is part of the reason we're bringing back Mailbag Monday. So I'll put out a tweet on Fridays saying, hey, Mailbag Monday, respond with your questions below. You can go ahead and tweet there, and I'll read through the responses on Monday's episodes or the first episodes of the week, and we'll run through some of the questions and answers. So we're going to start doing those feature segments again because, like, there's only so many times we could talk about what the Phillies' projected roster is, or like a minor league trade that happened, or if nothing happens because it's January and the news cycle is slowing down significantly for Major League Baseball. Obviously, we'll break into big news whenever we get it here on Locked On Phillies. But with that notwithstanding, we're still going to be looking at some segments being brought back like those. Those are the two big ones, Off the Poll and Mailbag Monday. So audience participation, if you've been commenting on the YouTube or tweeting at me on X, this is the time for you to jump in, have your voice heard, and have an impact on what the content is here on Locked On Phillies. So I appreciate all of our great listeners and followers as we kick off another fun year of Locked On Phillies here in 2025. And hopefully we get a little more clarity soon on some of the big moves for the Phillies. That'll give us a little bit more stuff to talk about with the Alec Bohm situation. I'm going to do a time frame of when that needs to be figured out by. when logically the Phillies would have to trade Bohm by to figure all of this stuff out in order to put themselves in the best position. So that might give us an idea of like a date to look for that potential trade coming down. And after that, it might be time to just come to terms with it being on the team. So that's something that we'll discuss coming up later this week. And we'll also take a look at some of the other free agents available that weren't on like this top list that I have done previously of like the big time names. But dive through some bullpen names where the nitty gritty is kind of where you find more diamonds in the rough in the bullpen in Major League Baseball than probably anywhere else. So we've still got stuff that we'll get into. It's going to be a fun year on Locked On Phillies, and first episode of the year is done. So let me just remind you, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're listening to this in podcast form. Subscribe to the YouTube Locked On Phillies YouTube channel for notifications when new episodes are posted. And I will talk to you on our next episode of Locked On Phillies later this week.